Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Gender Equity Spotlight. My name is Mike Baggerman. I'm the Communications Director for the YMCA Buffalo Niagara. As we continue our discussion about gender equities, we're very pleased to have on a panel of local women in prominent positions in the Western New York community. I want to introduce our three panelists. First, Danielle Shainbrown. Danielle is the President and Chief Business Officer at McGuire Development. Danielle has a vast knowledge of the Western New York real estate market, property management, legal processes, and business efficiencies. As she mentioned in her welcome video, which you saw earlier this week for the Gender Equity Spotlight, she has experienced micro and macroaggressions at all levels, which includes uncomfortable jokes, but she's also seen instances of unequal pay and the seemingly unbreakable glass ceiling. Danielle is also a proud member of the YMCA Buffalo Niagara Board of Directors. She was a member of the Leadership Buffalo class of 2011, a recipient of Buffalo Business First 40 Under 40 Award, and a member of the Bar Association of Erie County. Next on our panel, we have Kelly Craig, the Executive Director at the Pride Center of Western New York. Kelly's role as Executive Director is to promote the lifelong health and well-being of those who are LGBTQ+. She has spent the last 11 years at Evergreen Health with roles including Grant Quality Manager and Manager of Medical Grants. She is also Support Coordinator, Clinical Adherence Coordinator, and Residential Services Supervisor for Benedict House of Western New York, as well as a Health Education Specialist at MOCA Buffalo. That's a program that offers social events and other programs focused on improving the health and wellness of LGBTQ people of color. She has a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's degree in public administration from both from Buffalo State College. And finally, we're very happy to have on Kimberly DeSimone, a professor at St. Bonaventure University. Kimberly is an experienced Fortune 500 marketer and student-centered professor at St. Bonaventure. She received a doctorate in leadership and policy from Niagara University and her master's degree in business administration from St. Bonaventure. Before teaching, she was a senior marketing manager at Fisher-Price, where she developed long-term and short-term business strategies and marketing plans for multiple multi-million-dollar global businesses. She's also a proud advocate for advancing women and women's workforce successes and is president of the Buffalo Niagara chapter of the New York State Women Incorporated. First of all, thank you all again for joining us. And I want to start, Danielle, with you. As we talk about gender equity, people have been hearing that term a lot over the last week. But how would you define that term?
Gender equity to me is leveling the playing field regardless of your gender identity, your sexual orientation. Everyone is an equal person in the workplace. I can put on a hard hat and steel-toe shoes, and I should be able to stand literally toe-to-toe with any man on the construction site. And the same would go for a courtroom, a law office, a business facility, a manufacturing floor. People should be judged by their attributes, their skills, who they are and what they've achieved, rather than what their gender is, how they present themselves. And that's really what we're here to talk about this week.
And then Kelly, I'd like to go to you next. What do you define as gender equity?
In my opinion, as it relates to equity, I feel that it recognizes that each person has differences, but being able to be on the same playing field for people to have the same resources provided to them in any specific dynamic or situation.
And Kimberly, if you'd like to add to that.
Sure, those are both great answers. I would just say that we have a long history of androcentrism, which is the idea that male is the default. So it's kind of seen as the blueprint for all things, comfort levels in the way room temperatures are in businesses, what the ideal worker norms are. And I think that gender equity is about humanity being the default, and not one group being the kind of norm and the default and everyone else being made to assimilate to that blueprint. That for me is gender equity.
Danielle, if I could go back to you for just a moment, you had brought up some of your real life experiences in the workforce about how you've seen inequities. Could you highlight some of the real life examples? And then after that, Kimberly and Kelly, if you guys would like to discuss your real life examples that you've seen about inequities, I think that'd be very important for people to see.
Sure, and some of them are as simple as I wear high heels because I'm 5'1", and I'll wear them on to a construction site, and it's kind of now become my thing. I've been doing this for over a decade. And the men on the construction site will say, "What are you doing here, little girl? Why are you here? Those shoes are totally inappropriate." It's just these little things to kind of diminish me and who I am. And I'm coming on the site to look at the work they're doing and make sure that they're following the plans and specs. And it creates a dynamic where instead of me being in a supervisory role, it's putting me down. That's a great, easy example of kind of everyday life.
And then Kelly.
Sure, if I may. Coming from a position of power, in my opinion, also being in the LGBT plus community, I think that there is a great divide as it relates to the white gay male versus the trans woman of color coming to the table with, if not more experience and expertise and credentials, but that is sometimes made secondary.
And Kimberly?
Yeah, I can't help but a little bit reference some of the literature on some of the key things that we know through the research women experience, and a couple of the biases that women experience that I think every woman or every person who expresses feminine in any way would say they felt is one Williams and Dempsey call the tightrope bias, which is the balance for women between being seen as competent but being likable. And I think, if you go back to Saturday Night Live skit with Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, when they talked about Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin, Sarah Palin was the caribou Barbie, as Tina Fey called it. And Hillary Clinton was the competent bitch versus likable, incompetent person. And I think you see all the time women having the exhausting extra kind of labor of making sure that we are somehow managing the feelings and comfort levels of everyone around us by ensuring that we're not presenting. And I think, Danielle, you alluded to this a little bit, right? Well, what if I present too feminine, but then if I try to present too masculine, there's going to be backlash then for going against societal norms and expectations. And so I think I see all the time women worried and concerned and thinking through and taking on the emotional labor of the comfort of others to ensure that we are presenting in a way that walks this tightrope. And I see it in every industry, in every place, and in everywhere. This idea of I have to be really mindful of how the way I behave and present will land. We see all this advice like stand in a power position, but then if I do that, how will I be received? Will I be seen as intimidating? I'm supposed to negotiate, but if I do that, then she's difficult to work with. She has rough elbows.
The angry woman syndrome.
That's
angry
right.
woman, yeah.
You're all of these things, and and then also because you mentioned that, Kelly, I have to say, women carry the weight of every other woman. If a woman is in a CEO role or in the position any of us are in, and they fail, that's a failure of women being able to do that thing. And nobody says, wow, that last male president was terrible. Maybe we shouldn't have another white male president. But you hear this with women like, well, we tried a woman and it didn't work out. So I think those are the kinds of things I see everywhere I look.
Well, Kimberly, if I can go back to you then for this next question is we've seen over the last several decades and the last several generations, there's been a lot of progress that's been made for women. You brought up the SNL skit from, what was that, 2008? That
2008, yes, very good.
We're looking back even just 13 years, and there's still questions, and there's still questions even today. But I want to get your perspective on the progress that's been made and what progress still needs to go.
Yeah, I think we need to be really careful anytime we have this idea that it's fixed, because when people don't think there's a problem, they're less likely to have empathy and less likely to care about fixing it, because if it ain't broke, you don't need to fix it. And there's a very real broken pipeline for women to top level positions of power, pay, and prestige. This year, we had, for the first time in the history of the Fortune 500, 2 Black women CEOs Okay. And this is one of the groups of women that is being amongst the most highly educated in some of the best business schools in the country. And it was like extra, extra, read all about it. 2 Black women on the Fortune 500 CEOs. Now, there's more men named David who are CEOs in the Fortune 500 than women all together. So it is absurd from a data perspective to present any story or narrative that says we're there. Positions of power, pay, prestige, and influence at the very top are still eminently white and eminently male. So we have to understand the waters we're swimming in and be very real. That's not discounting the hard work of getting to the middle, but it's still very much a pyramid. And better isn't the goal. Equality is the goal. Equity is the goal. So better, okay, yes, whatever that means. Are half of our homes being cared for by men and half being cared for by women, and half of our workforce being led by men and half being led by women? No. Does the top level represent, if 17% is African American, is that what we're seeing at the top? No. And as long as that imbalance is there, then I appreciate where we've been, but it's to build from and to never take our foot off the gas pedal, because we're not even close to where we need to be.
Kelly, I'd like to go to you next because you have an interesting perspective, because while you're also trying to fight for women, you also have to fight for the LGBT plus community, which has taken longer to establish just because of the trends in our society. It's a unique battle for you. Could you talk about the progress the LGBT plus community has faced and what still needs to happen?
For me, when you think about progress, I think of people being able to bring awareness to any situation, say, hey, this is not the status quo, or this should not be the status quo. Also saying that and being unapologetic about it, but also having solutions. Hey, for instance, how do we, for instance, say in our communities, our sub-communities of LGBT plus Q, that there is a divide, and what does that really look like, and being able to have real conversations about it.
And then Danielle, if we can just go back to you, just to talk about what progress you've seen over the years. You've been working in construction. You obviously still have a lot of challenges that you're facing, especially in that male-dominated field.
I mean, I think the landscape is certainly looking slightly more balanced, but I think to Kimberly's point, we're still, making news headlines out of when a female becomes a CEO or a female becomes a notable figure. I don't see those headlines for males. Why is it newsworthy? As in my career, I've seen evening to a certain extent, but it's in the picture of it. Who's on the web page in the hierarchical tree, but then who's really doing the work, and it doesn't always translate out to reality. And that's disappointing to me. You hired a figurehead. That's not really helping if the men are still pulling the strings or whatever. If it's racial or whatever,
Yeah, I love what you're saying. We talk about tokenism and even toucanism, which is like the new thing. Like now we have 2 Black women on the Fortune 500, which is really just toucanism, right?
Not one, we've got 2.
Yeah, we've got 2, like rah, rah. But I think you're exactly right in a lot of what you're saying in that way. I just think we have to be careful to realize that a face at the table is not a voice at the table. And I think one of the biggest issues with diversity issues is we are solving, and I really use the term loosely, a lot of times we're thinking that having a person there, bring your authentic self. Well, we all know that trap. No women believe they can bring their authentic self because we are trained, we're socialized to understand that really what's wanted is for us to get in line. And so until you have a face at the table and a voice at the table, that can challenge. And you had mentioned, Kelly, challenging the status quo. Until the voices at the table are challenging and being accepted and heard, we can put as many, women sitting at the table. And I love that you said that, Danielle, because we do have to make sure that, you're not just there, but not pulling the strings, or meant to be so grateful that you were even invited. I think
I
sometimes
like,
there's this idea of gratitude that we're supposed to have for being invited. And so let's be careful again. And, it's
mhm,
just, I think we can all agree it's exhausting, the being careful and the kind
yes,
of assimilation and, get in line that is kind of expected even when you arrive and you finally think you're in a position to make that change, but you learn very quickly. That's not really what's wanted, even if they say that. So don't fall into that trap. And I think that's getting through
No,
that.
it's
Like you
or
have to
even,
exactly,
be
or
authentic.
even
That's good.
hypothetically catching yourself. Okay, well, I feel like this, but this is because, and
right.
and it aligns our mission and all of that
Right.
stuff.
Right.
You
Flanking
know,
every opinion with in a way that is, palatable to the
yeah,
group.
delicate. I
Yes.
think about, I'm raising a 5-year-old little girl and I have a 13-year-old son. And the way I'm raising them, I notice making conscious changes. She's very headstrong and I don't want to quash her bossiness, but bossiness is such a bad thing in today's work environment. I want her to be bossy. I want her to be assertive. I want her to be strong because she's smart and she should not feel at all ashamed about asserting herself. But I find myself, I just got off a phone call right before this where I was negotiating on behalf of a client. And I congratulated myself at the end of the call because I kept my tone very low so I wouldn't offend anybody. But I felt really strongly about what I was saying and I was being talked down to. So, but in order for me to be heard, I would be completely disregarded if I raised my tone. So
Kelly,
if you,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, no, I go ahead and finish your thought, Danielle.
No, I'm done.
Okay. So Kelly, I want to pose this question to you is, we talk a lot about kind of the tiptoeing that women and people in the LGBTQ community have had to do in order to get on the same, from a business climate on the same level as men. I'm curious though, with all the progress that's been made over the last several years, I mean, we know that it's not there yet. How long do you think it would take before everyone has what is perceived publicly as an equal voice? Do you think it's going to be done in the next 20 years, 50 years?
I,
What do you think
I
it would take to get
humbly and honestly cannot say that that can happen at the flick of a switch, if that makes sense. I always say there has to be real conversations about it, bringing awareness to it, and also calling those decision makers in higher places to the table as in, this is real. What are you going to do about
Yeah,
it?
that allyship, right? Allyship and
Right, the allyship as
amplification.
well. And a lot of times, and not even just when you think of equity and equality, some people just don't get it. They really don't get it. So you have to be able to have those conversations with people and say, hey, have you ever thought about it this way? Or tell me how you would feel if you were in this situation, and so on.
You can't clean your house if you don't see the dirt.
That's
Mhm.
exactly right.
And I guess, Kimberly, you had brought up, can the issue be fixed? That's the big question.
I think if we stop fixing the women and start fixing the organization, we need to
Mhm.
very quickly move the focus away from coaching, mentoring, and workshopping women into fixing something because we're neither broken nor defective. And so I think this shift in, even I like Sheryl Sandberg and I think the book
Mhm.
Lean In has good aspects of it. And, you take that which serves and you leave behind that which doesn't. But, I think we need to start talking about organizations and society leaning in. Like, I don't want to hear about how I have to lean in and fix the woman problem because we're actually the solution, not the problem. The research is pretty clear on this, whether it's women, persons of color, the LGBTQ community, people with different perspectives and diversity bring higher return on investments in organizations. And we know this, but the problem is power doesn't give up power. It has to be taken. And it's not easy to do. And it's not easy to look in the mirror and say, I'm part of the problem. And I think some of that is, sometimes I hear people talk and they're allies, even men are like, well, I think it's so, what you're doing is so important. I think it's so right. And I'm like, well, what are 3 things you did this week specifically to fix this? And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, this is kind of one of those not in my backyard, well, it's not like that here. And I'm like, it's exactly like that here. I don't care where here is.
If
It's
that's your
exactly like
answer,
that.
yeah, if your answer is it's not like that here, then it's 100% like
Whenever
that
somebody says it's not like that here, I go, it's exactly like that here.
Yeah.
I don't even care where here is. Trust me, it's exactly like that.
Right.
And, you can't, and I think that's why data is so important. You can't feel things. You have to look at the truth. Well, it feels like it's equitable. Well, 90% of our wealth in this country is held by men. So that is unequivocally, statistically, data-driven, not equal. So you can feel, well, it feels like it's so hard for a white man to get ahead anymore. I'm like, 92% of CEOs are white men. So it isn't hard. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
it feels that way, but because when you are used to having the total power, even a tiny chunk out of it feels like this huge amount that you're giving somehow. And I think we have to get, you said it, Kelly, it is about awareness, but it's about acceptance. Like it is a problem. We are not there. We all have to lean in to fixing it. Yes, you, yes, there.
I think
It's so hard. Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I said it, I alluded to it in the opening to the week. It's, oftentimes someone will make a microaggressive statement to me and I end up laughing to try to diffuse the situation because it's awkward and there's
You've been socialized to believe that you're sensitive. Like as women, we're not supposed to be sensitive, but we are. We're meant to be sensitive.
Right.
Then you're meant to be sensitive, but then not. And
right. Yeah. And then, she laughed at it. So it wasn't a bad statement. I didn't, it wasn't offensive because she laughed at it. Mm-hmm. But I'm socialized to think that in order to fit in, I have to be one of the boys. I have to laugh at their jokes. And that's not
align
true
with
to myself.
The winners. Align with the winners, mm-hmm. right? Be more like the winners. The ones
Kelly's dying.
I'm as you say that, I'm thinking and I'm catching myself like, damn, Kelly, you have really did that sometimes, and then you get home at the end of your day, you are disgusted with yourself. You're like, why didn't I jump in and defend that? Or why didn't I, have that conversation? So also when you ask if there's work to do, we have a lot to do on our end as well.
I think though, Kelly, I'm going to challenge that and say too often women internalize the blame for playing a game. This game was not designed by us, for us. And when we are forced to play it, then we're meant to feel like we're getting it wrong. And I'm not saying don't be mindful of that, but it's a real challenge on our part. And I think we have to kind of, I have a podcast called the Advancing Women Podcast. And the mantra is, it's not your fault, but it is your problem. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to say that about everything. Like, it is not your fault that the environment has done that to you, that has socialized you to believe this about yourself. So I'm going to let go of the blame and the faults completely. Now, it is my problem, unfortunately. To your point, Danielle, I've got to think about that and be mindful of it in ways that other people do not, but it is not our fault. And I think if there's one thing I could say to every woman, every person of color, everyone from the LGBTQ community that is constantly made to feel like you are, and if I hear this term, it makes me crazy, like we're getting in our own way. No, that is language that does not serve us, that needs to be put in the trash bin. We are not getting in our own way. We are not broken. It is not our fault. We are part of the solution, but we are not the problem. And so I think problematizing underrepresented groups need to end. We need to stop problematizing. And even that language, like, I'm not a problem to be solved. I am not a problem to be solved. And I am doing the best I can in a world that was not designed for me to be succeeding in necessarily. And I've got to try to navigate that. And so, Danielle, like, you need to cut yourself a little bit of a break. We all do, I think, a little bit, because it's not easy. I mean, I can't think of how many times somebody said to me, like, you're being defensive. And now I finally get to the point where I say, no, I'm not being defensive. I'm being defending. Defensive is pushing my point down your throat. I am defending my point. I'm listening to you and giving you my counterpoint. And that's not the same thing. And so owning our narrative, and I think owning our narrative externally and internally, owning the narrative of, it's not my fault, I do have to deal with it, but I'm not going to own the blame. And I'm not going to allow you to create a narrative that is not accurate in terms of what I bring here and who I am here. And I think that's a real challenge that we all need to accept.
Well, we're very grateful that all of you were able to join us for this Gender Equity Spotlight panel. This was a really important conversation to have. And I think,
Yes.
you know, the big takeaway from this is that we're not looking to solve the issue today. It was mentioned during this that you can't just flip a switch and make the situation figured out, but with continued discussion, we know we can make progress together. So Danielle Shainbrown, Kelly Craig, Kimberly DeSimone, thank you all so much for joining us. And for any of you who are watching this panel, if you missed any of it, we're going to also be featuring it on our YouTube channel, and you can also watch the entire video in its entirety at ymcabn.org/gender-equity-spotlight. The link will be right here, right where I'll put this in post-production. So thank you all so much for joining us. This was wonderful.